This episode of Let's Find Out with co-host Diego is brought to you by the Snarly Yow, located at the Needful Things Emporium in Charlestown, West Virginia.
What's up, historians? This is Adam, the historian ghost hunter from the Historically Haunted podcast. You're getting ready to listen to co-host Diego and his guest on the Let's Find Out podcast. They're going to talk about the Pilgrims, a couple things about the Massachusetts Plymouth Bay, and as they talk about that, I want to drop a little fun fact for you here. In 1621, the year after they landed, more than half the crew died because of the harsh winter. So to hide their lowering numbers from the Native American tribes, to not let them know they were getting depleted, they would bury their dead at night in unmarked graves. So right now in Plymouth, there are unmarked graves. There are dead pilgrims all over the Bay Shore. So next time you're down there checking out the rock and checking out the sites, remember you could be walking on some of them. So enjoy the show, guys. Thanks, historians.
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's another episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me. On this episode of Let's Find Out, history reports that in 1620 the Pilgrims faced terrible dangers while traveling on the Mayflower for approximately 60 days and eventually landing in what is now known as America. But that's just the beginning of the story. On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest will tell us some very interesting history and generally unknown facts about the Pilgrims that wasn't written about in our history books. We will also dive into the wonderful world of Western Maryland Folklore. All this plus more. Please welcome to Let's Find Out author Susan Fair. Susan, my friend.
Hello. Thank
Welcome
you
to
so
Let's
much for
Find
having
Out.
me.
No, thank you for coming on the show. It's fun because we met several months back last summer. We first met Snarly Yow's Cryptid Halloween in Charlestown.
That's
and before the event actually started, I like to go around the tables and meet the other vendors and authors, introduce myself. And then I'm passing by your table and I'm seeing all the terrific books that you have. A couple of books stuck out to me, but the first one we're going to talk about, if you don't mind, let's talk about Pilgrims, because as I was growing up in grade school, and I was telling you before the show that I was so interested in history, but there's something that happens to a young person when they hit their teenagers that they don't really pursue history anymore. We have other interests. Now as an adult, I really crave that information.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Pilgrims. Confidential, shocking stories of the Pilgrims in the strange new world. In a strange world it was for them indeed. As with any history, Susan, we don't really get a full story of what went on during those times. It was a battle of survival. What went on back then that we really didn't learn about, because it seemed like they had a pretty awful time when they came here.
They certainly did. Starting with their voyage over, there were originally two ships, the Mayflower and the Speedwell, and the Speedwell kept taking on the water. They had to turn around like twice, and finally some of the folks from the Speedwell got onto the Mayflower and crowded on, and by the time they actually reached the coastline of America, some of the folks had been on the ship like 3 to 4 months, just because of all the time that had passed fooling with the problems with the Speedwell and all that, all the, getting out to sea 100 miles and having to turn back. And then once they got to the coast of what is now New England, known as New England, that was when things started getting really dark for the folks on the Mayflower. Um, the people who were on the Mayflower were religious separatists from England who had been, most of them living in Holland for about 10 years. And then things weren't so good in Holland, and they decided to try their luck in America. They were ill equipped to do so, but they were kind of desperate. And along with them were some some other folks. It wasn't just the people we think of as the Pilgrims today, or the people who came for religious reasons. There were also the people that the Pilgrims referred to as the strangers, and they were the non religious people who were wanted to just try their luck in America, and see if they could make a good go of things there. Presumably, there were a lot of folks who were kind of escaping things of one thing or another, or problems or trouble they were in England, among the quote unquote strangers. But by the time they made it to the coast of Cape Cod, they were they were all coming down with what they referred to as the general sickness. And indeed, by the end of that winter, they didn't arrive on the coastline until like the middle of, well, it was 11/11, 1620, and they didn't go ashore for a couple more days. By the time they started actually building shelters, they didn't begin doing that until December 20th. So there had already been snows. They waited way too long to start building their shelters. And by that point, everyone was getting sick. Some folks had already died by like March. Um, a little over half of the people in the Mayflower had perished.
Well,
And the people who survived, there were like some entire families wiped out. There were numerous children who were orphaned. There were widows and widowers. And so lots of, people kind of made new families, putting the pieces together. But the Pilgrims definitely had a terrible winter. They got off to a horrible start with the Native American population, in that they did every terrible thing any colonizer has ever done to indigenous peoples. They chased the Indians with guns. This was all before they even started building, their fort. They chased the Indians with guns. They dug up graves. They weren't content with just digging up graves. They had to like totally unwrap and study the bodies. They dug up a baby. They stole things from the graves. They stole corn that the Indians had put away for the winter. Even stole a pot from that they put corn in to carry it off. So, in over the course of the winter, which they had to survive going back, basically back and forth from the ship, which stayed in the harbor through like April, with a greatly reduced crew because like half of the crew had also died. Once they started building their fort, they would have work parties go ashore, and they knew that the Indians were watching them. They couldn't always see them. Sometimes they would see fires in the distance, but the Indians were definitely keeping an eye on them, trying to figure out what they were doing because they weren't acting like other people who had been off the shores of New England. They had interacted with lots and lots of people who had come from Europe to like trade with the Indians and for fishing purposes and that sort of thing. But these people, they couldn't figure out what the heck they were doing. The people who were settling what would be known as Plymouth, because they had actually had children and babies with them, which they couldn't figure out why in the world they would have these uh, poor little kids and babies with them. They weren't trying to like barter with the Indians or anything like that. They weren't trying to kidnap the Indians, as some people had done. They just couldn't figure out what their game was. And they finally realized that they were planning to stay. And of course, that made the Indians very uneasy because that was like a whole new deal. And likely they knew not much good could come of it. So it, the first winter was bleak in a way, like they can't easily put into history books for like elementary school students, who end up growing up, picturing the first Thanksgiving, in this stereotypical cartoon kind of way that, most of us, grew up thinking of it. The settlers were so frightened, concerned about the Indians that they would actually put like their sick and dying outside at night with guns in their hands, and possibly even like corpses sitting out with propped against trees with guns in their hands, in order to try to intimidate the Indians. And, they would be very secretive about burying, because, people were dying left and right, and they didn't want the Indians to know that their numbers were dwindling so much. So they had to be very secretive about burials. So, I mean, it was all a very, very dark time for the Pilgrims and the strangers and the Indians, for
I mean, it all
sure.
sounds pretty terrible, and I
Definitely.
can
I wouldn't
understand
have
what.
lasted. That's for sure.
Nah, neither would I. And I
No.
guess things like that, you really, especially the age group that I was in third or fourth grade, present such a history. As you were
Mhm.
talking, sometimes thoughts form in my mind when I recall back when voyages, when they go out to different parts of the world, they're usually financed by somebody, or they go somewhere, have ulterior motives as
Right.
to where they land. Was there some sort of different game plan with the Pilgrims? Who financed this voyage? Or
Yes, there was. I not sure if it was the New England Company, but yes, there were. Like businessmen, and definitely who put a lot of financing towards this undertaking. And it would be quite a good while before anybody, made any kind of money off of what was going on at Plymouth. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of people behind the scenes who had a lot of different interests, but it was definitely sponsored by um, you know, the concept of commerce for sure. Yeah, because the Pilgrims, wouldn't have been able to have done it on their own at all.
not at all. And what might be a very basic question with the Pilgrims, and I know if we in today's terms we call them separatists, but what was it they were escaping from? Was there some sort of religious persecution going on in that part of the world that they say, we got to get out of here for fear of their lives?
Mhm. Yes, the Church of England well, they started out in England, the Pilgrims, and the Church of England, wanted everyone to have that same religion, and they were like legitimately, persecuted for sure. Um, and um, they would never knew when they were going to be arrested. And lots of times, if the man of the household was arrested and thrown into prison indefinitely, because of their religious activities, then like the rest of the family would be like on the street, and in danger of perishing. And so, and for that reason, they fled to Holland, where they could, practice their religion, but they had like very little opportunities as far as like making a living. And and they found that the young people who were coming up, like their own children, as they got a little older, they, were not very interested in continuing living the way that they lived, just simply for the religion. There is no other opportunities for them or anything. And there was also like a lot of conflict in Europe in general at the time, and it was looking like wars were breaking out, and it was just a good time to get out of Dodge again for them, they felt. So yeah, they had legitimate reasons for wanting to leave, but as is typical with all the early settlers in America, they didn't take the people who are already living there into consideration at all, and felt like they called them savages basically, and believed that they were less than almost less than human in a lot of cases, and that it was, if they could convert them, and enlighten them, then the Pilgrims felt like they would get in better with God, if they could do that to with these savages, I guess. But the Indians, of course, had their own religious, spiritual beliefs, but
Yeah,
ironically,
that
yeah,
they did.
so
Yeah.
they, did the same thing, persecuted, you know, Quakers and Indians and everyone else, who didn't share, their religious beliefs too. So,
And in a way, that's kind of, I think that's part of our human nature when certain religious sects don't respect other ones. There's always you always guarantee there's gonna be some sort of a battle. It was the same thing.
for
I mean, not
sure.
just the Pilgrims and, of course, the Europeans, but also Spaniards or Europeans. But Spaniards were also, when they came to this side of the world, they were doing the same things to the
Mhm.
tribes in Mexico and the Caribbean. So these are kind of things. I guess it's the dark side of the human condition, to where
Yeah,
we have these slightly more advanced invaders that come in and just start pretty much wiping out certain sects of populations. But
right.
it's unfortunately that's just the way it is. It'd be great if it didn't happen, but it still goes on to this day,
Oh, for
unfortunately.
sure.
So
For sure.
why pilgrims? Let me ask you: was this something part of history you were always interested in?
I wasn't super interested in history until I got, a little older myself. Like many people, like I found it very boring in school because it's just kind of like broken down into like it's just so many dates and charters and this and that, that it's there it's like the most interesting thing imaginable to me once you really get into it, and especially when you like read like original sources, like primary source narratives, people writing about, their experiences as they're happening to them, or writing about what had happened to them, and diaries and journals and all that. It's just, to me, it's just like the most fascinating thing. And most of the stories, it just turns history, from something dry into something very real and compelling, and something that your imagination can really, experience. So I definitely, I find like very the early settlers and early, colonial period in America, like, super interesting. I mean, I could read Donner Party narratives, all day long.
Oh my word! That reminds me, just like you, we were talking before the show started. I really started digging history as I got older because growing up, a lot of history is on this date. This guy did this on this date. You're remembering the
Mhm.
dates, but you're not really diving into the history or the whys or the whos.
Right.
And I think that your book does that in a terrific way. And speaking of books, because how many books do you have out now? Because it seems like you have a good amount of books.
Just a few, really. Mysteries and Lore of Western Maryland. One called American Witches, a broomstick tour through 4 centuries, and Pilgrim Confidential, shocking true stories of the Pilgrims in the strange new world. And then I have just a small little volume of called Maryland Spells, that just recounts like some of the folklore related to witchcraft and spells and hexes and all that kind of stuff, superstitions in Maryland.
Well, the reason I asked because you brought up the title of the book of the next subject we're going to talk about with mysteries and lore of Western Maryland. And I'll be honest with you, growing up in the Northern Virginia area most of my life, I really don't think of Maryland having that type of history. Because anytime I usually with Maryland, it was with the traffic
Civil War.
congestion, the drivers, and
Yeah,
things like that, like you're saying, right? But the
for
more and more
sure.
I do these episodes and the show goes on, I started learning things about like Maine, Connecticut, of course, the
Hmm.
Western states, South America. All these countries have
Hmm.
great lore. They have their own cryptids, beautiful history. Never in my life would have thought Maryland. So let's talk about
Yeah.
Western Maryland lore.
Yes. Have you heard of the Snallygaster?
I have, but I'm not really that smart about it. So if you don't mind telling me something about it.
Yeah, I think the Snallygaster is probably like the quote unquote cryptid that gets most attention in Maryland. And the Snallygaster was allegedly this huge, basically like a dragon type monster with like one eyeball in the middle of its forehead and a huge beak and giant talons, and it could breathe fire and it could change color and all this kind of stuff. And it actually was first heard of right after a series of Jersey Devil sightings. After that had been like a real big thing in New Jersey. And then a few weeks later, lo and behold, creature that would come to be called the Snallygaster makes its appearance in the headlines of the Middletown Valley Register. Which is Middletown is a small town in Frederick County, Maryland. It sort of turned out it was very obvious. It's very obvious when like looking at it today to us, um, like what was going on with this creature. The headline, the first article about the Snallygaster that ever appeared, the headline was, "The colored people are in great danger. Monster Go Devil in this section of Maryland attacks only colored men." So, and basically it kind of goes on from there, talking about how this was menacing Black people, and this monster had already seized a Black man who was walking along, and it sucked the blood out of its neck. Apparently, the editor there was an editor, George Roderick, and the reporter Ralph Wolf were apparently, obviously, as many people were then and still are, very, very racist. A lot of what this seemed to center around was like the growing interest in from the Black community in having more rights. The NAACP was just being formed. There's a direct connection between the Snallygaster and the newspaper trying to discourage Black men from voting. And women didn't have the vote yet, women of any race, but at this time, Black men could vote. But of course, many, many states, especially in the South, did whatever they could to discourage Black men from voting. And I guess in the border states, got a little more creative about it and made up a whole big ass monster to like terrorize people. And yeah, so it's a very unfortunate use of what could have been a really cool monster, because like a lot of the stories, connected with the monster. There's like a lot of um, the the stuff that doesn't have to do with like it tormenting Black people. There's like some like comical kind of things and a lot of tongue in cheek kind of stuff, but just when you think, it's all in good fun, then they, throw in, the next, racist thing. They do say that it doesn't go after Black children, and it doesn't usually go after Black women. It's the Black men that the Snallygaster goes after. But again and again, it just all of the articles. There were two rushes of Snallygaster. There were two Snallygaster events in 1909 and 1932, and both of those occasions, racism was largely featured. So and there's no historic background anywhere to this creature before this time. Literally was said to be like whatever creature had been in New Jersey that had been in the papers. They were like, oh, now it's coming our way, but now it's going after the Black people, But as far as any existence of the Snallygaster before this newspaper article from 1909, the colored people are in great danger. There is no reference to the Snallygaster as a
So a
monster.
contrived hoax just to frighten people of a certain race. Now,
Exactly.
has there been any stories of Snallygaster in our modern history, and has the Snallygaster cleaned up its act now?
Well, I think, it's not anything that's been cited, but I mean, as far as as anybody like really seeing it, like a lot of people, who grew up kind of hearing about the Snallygaster, but not in the context of these newspaper articles. It was more like, people, like the parents would say, you can't stay out after dark. The Snallygaster will get you, and that kind of thing. So like most people today, who have heard of the Snallygaster, don't know that that was the actual literal origin of the Snallygaster. Was the racist angle. So it has continued to be something, that's like local folklore, almost separate from, how it originated, but, it's important to kind of know where it came from too, and there's a lot of misinformation about, that it came, like it was like legends from Germany that the settlers talked about when they came over, but there's no mention of it. There's a well-known book called South Mountain Magic by Madeline Dahlgren, which she, wrote in the 1880s, and she talked to like all the local people, and recounted the stories in her book. And there is no mention of a Snallygaster or anything remotely like the Snallygaster in her book. And there's no other, reference to the Snallygaster.
That's a good thing too. Is what an awful background to that story where something could have been
For
so
sure.
nice. And yeah, so let's
This
move
is
on
why
to.
we can't have nice things
I was just about to
in
say
America.
that, but thank you for saying it. So moving on, because I know that there's a lot more in Western Maryland folklore, and I'll bring some of these up. We talked earlier, the Deep Creek Lake monks. These things sound pretty amazing. Now they never leave the monastery. I mean, who are these guys?
That's the Carmel Cove monks. They were friars, like from an it was an order of friars that originated in the 12th century. And they purchased 53 acres of land in Western Maryland near Deep Creek Lake in the 40s, and built themselves a monastery. And the monastery today is a bed and breakfast. I assume it's still a bed and breakfast. At the time I wrote the book, it was. But the folks who now run the bed and breakfast, the Carmel Cove Inn bed and breakfast, say that they've had lots of experiences with ghosts of the former residents, the monks there, and visitors report seeing spirits. They'll see like kind of a blue face with an ecclesiastical headdress on it. People often feel like the presence of these monks, and they hear noises that they associate with the monks. It sounds like an interesting place, and I have not been there, but it sounds cool. Monks are kind of eerie.
Because
Just
they're
as a
a little too
persona.
quiet for my taste.
There you go.
I'm looking at the cover of your book and reading the description because also you're talking about dog bed in Maryland. Is that? I didn't think that'd be something up in our area or your area. That is.
Yeah. There's a kind of well-known like latter-day dogman story associated with kind of the Frederick County Gambrels Mountain area. Um, and there's someone, I don't know if he's still active in the paranormal community today, but his name is Reverend Roger Swope. He pretty sure he's been like on paranormal shows before now and has done the occasional exorcism and that sort of thing. But anyway, this was a story that was relayed to him by a young woman who approached him at a conference. And she actually had this experience. It's probably about 8 miles from where I am right now, on a back road here in Maryland. And she was driving by herself at night, it was dark, on this back road, which is like a very rugged road. Like it's one of those kind of roads where it's two ways, but there's really only room for like one car. It's all wooded. And she suddenly saw this creature like out the side window of her car, and it was standing upright, and it had fangs and like this menacing, awful, like scary look on its face. And she had been like driving, kind of creeping along, I guess, at first. And then when she saw this thing kind of pacing her car, she started going faster and it was keeping up with her. Um, and basically, like her description was like literally of what we know today as dogman, which, like a werewolf type looking guy.
Right.
And she said, she could see it well enough that it was definitely not a bear. It was not a person, but it was walking on two legs. It was supernaturally fast. And so, anyway, she finally got where she was going and, left it behind, but she was just like absolutely terrified and traumatized by it. And Reverend Swope, found her very credible. And there's that kind of coincides with there's this Dwayyo, which was a creature that was reported in that same area back in the I think it was the late 60s. And that was a story that created, quite a stir for a while. But it was a man who had seen a creature that sounded a lot like a dog man on his property along the mountainside there. And he said he had basically gotten into a fist fight with it.
Wow.
And and apparently the police did respond, but nobody was ever able to provide like any more details or actually like locate this man. So that it's still well known in this area. And there's a great drawing that appeared in the newspaper of the creature and all, that you can find online pretty easily to this day. So, but it sound a lot like the creature that was reported to Reverend Swoop too. So maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe there are dogmen creatures around this area. Can't rule it out.
No, you can't, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
recently I learned just earlier this year that Virginia has a lot of dogmen or werewolf sightings as well. So
Really?
it wouldn't be surprise me if they either migrated from the south to the north and north to south. I mean, we're all really connected because
Hmm.
states they're invisible borders anyway. It's just one land, so why
Right.
not, right?
Right. There you go. Who knows?
And as you keep delving into the world of Maryland folklore, obviously Salagastro's off the list, but if you were to take one of these, which one is the one that mostly your favorite that you'd like to talk about the most?
Well, I'm very fond of the snarly owl. He has his own wayside marker along the National Road. It's right across the road from the old South Mountain Inn, which was where Madeline Dahlgren, who wrote South Mountain Magic, lived. And she wrote about the snarly owl in her book. And there were a lot of stories amongst the locals, back during that time, in the 1800s, about sightings. It was basically a type of phantom dog, maybe leaning towards a hellhound kind of dog, but it was connected with the national road that went in front of the inn. It would sort of just appear out of the darkness, loom up in front of travelers in the road, and like try to block the roadway, but they could go like right through it. Sometimes if people report it, they were on a horse, or, being pulled by horses in a wagon, and they would look back and they would see it behind them, this big phantom dog. And that's, as probably most of us know, that's a pretty common, archetype of creature, the phantom dog. And there are ghost dogs in the area too. In addition to the snarly owl, there's like a phantom dog that drags a chain. And they used to say that if you drank from a certain stream, the dog might appear next to you also drinking. There was a headless dog. So all kinds of variations on the dog thing. Um, but I think it's super cool that the snarly owl kind of has its own spot on a wayside marker. It's like one for the national road, and it shows the South Mountain Inn, and it shows the snarly owl. And I just think that's super fun. So it's right there on the outskirts of Boonsboro. Yeah,
You and I know somebody called Snarly Eye as well, so we know he's
that's
real because we
true.
saw him not long
That's
ago.
true. He seems very nice.
Oh, he seems so far. He seems very nice. Yes, ma'am.
He is.
And
He's a good guy.
for the listeners of Let's Find Out that want to know more about what it is that you do, your terrific books and the conventions you'll be headed to next, where can they find this information?
I am on Instagram. I am at SUCAFA. This is my initials. I had to think about it. But if you just look for Susan Fair, you probably find me. And I'm no longer on Facebook or Twitter/X, so I'm kind of limited on social media at this time. But you can find my email address on my Instagram as well, if you want to get in touch about anything. And currently, this sometime later this year, I've been working on a book with Matt Lake, who is the author of Weird Maryland and Weird Pennsylvania, and Brian Goodman. And we've been working on a book of Maryland and Delaware cryptids, and which should hopefully be out sometime this year.
Excellent. And when you have those next set of books, if you wouldn't mind coming back on the show, we'll go talk some more about this great folklore. And
I'd love to.
that'd be great. Susan, thank you
Okay.
again for being on the show. And I'll
Sure.
be seeing you down the road very soon.
Thanks for inviting me. Yep, I'll be seeing you soon. Thanks, Diego. Take care.
Thank you, my friend. This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Please check us out on all our social media pages. We are on YouTube and we're also on Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends. The Snarly Yow, located at the Needful Things Emporium in downtown Charlestown, West Virginia. T-shirts, artwork, cryptid books. The Snarly Yow has it. Snarly coffee, snarly prints, snarly beard care. The Snarly Yow has it. Cryptid spice rubs, cryptid soaps, cryptid candles. The Snarly Yow has it. The Snarly Yow is located at the Needful Things Emporium, 218 West Washington Street, Charlestown, West Virginia. For all your cryptid needs, remember, the Snarly Yow has it. Make sure to tell him CoHostDiego sent ya.
Copyright CoHostDiego. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of CoHostDiego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, CoHostDiego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.